We'll talk baseball now with ESPN Major League Baseball reporter Pedro Gomez. He's got the Mets and Nationals as well on Wednesday Night Baseball. The Baseball Tonight crew, Pedro Gomez, will be a part of that with Alex Cora and Carl Ravitch. And it's a game that Phillies fans will be watching. The Nationals and the Mets there, Pedro, as the Phillies won again today, putting the pressure on these two teams. I don't even think we can believe it here in the Delaware Valley, where we're watching this thing happen every day. How does this team keep doing it?
There's a simple formula for what they're doing right now. They are pitching. They've got three guys who are pitching their brains out, and they are getting just when you can get starting pitching, anything can happen. You know, you brought up the Astros. Well, what was their formula last year? It was Dallas Keuchel. It was Lance McCullers. It was McHugh. I mean, they got pitching. And the Phillies right now are getting pitching. It's tough to maintain over the course of a full year, especially with guys that don't have a long track record, but that's not to say it can't happen. And as we all know, the more it happens, the more it starts to snowball, and a team starts to say, hey, why not us? That's kind of exactly what happened with the Astros a year ago, that it was the end of May, it was the end of June, it was the end of July. They were still up there. And then they all of a sudden said, well, to hell with it. We're going to do this. And even though they didn't win the division, they did reach the postseason. They won the wild card game. They made it to the ALDS. And they, you know, it's going to be a little tougher for the Phillies, I would say, because they're in a division with two really good teams. And the Astros were in a division where there wasn't really a superpower. So, you know, when you've got the Nationals and the Mets in the same division, it's going to be a much tougher row to hoe. But, hey, anything I would think is just more than gravy right now for Philly fans who didn't probably expect much this year.
Yeah, I mean, the expectations were really low. And here's the thing. At what point do you start to say this team has the longevity, Pedro? Because they've won 8 out of 9 series. I mean, when you're winning games, that's one thing. To continuously win series after series, they've won 8 out of 9. When is that date where you start to take a team serious? Because I do agree with something you said is when you're relying on young pitching, you do get concerned on when they're going to hit the skids and, you know, when they start to hit that wall a little bit. But, you know, 8 out of 9 series says something.
Without a doubt, it says something. It's, you know, the one thing that you can say about the Phillies is that from the moment that Pete Mackinnon took over, that club started playing a much more aggressive style of ball, and they were gritty and tough. And it has, you know, it's one thing for that to happen over the course of the last few weeks of the season, last couple of months after Ryan Sandberg got fired. But for it to continue over to this year says a lot about what Pete is doing. And let's not forget that this was Pete's first full spring training, and that's when you kind of get your teeth into your players. So his message during the spring was all about let's go, let's compete, just give it everything you've got on a nightly basis, and we'll see what happens. And all of a sudden, they're being rewarded for playing in that style, and that's when players start to say, hey, maybe we have something here. But it is difficult to maintain that with young pitchers who don't have the track record at the major league level. It's one thing if you're dropping in one young pitcher into a rotation that has a lot of veterans, but when you're relying on so many young pitchers without the track record, that's what makes it difficult. But I would say if you had to pick a date, hey, if they're still in it by August 1st, that would be where you start to say, okay, now you got to take the Phillies seriously.
Well, that's a long ways off then, so don't get too excited yet. And as you just mentioned, the guys that ESPN will have on tonight for Wednesday Night Baseball, the Nationals and the Mets, they got two really good teams in the division, and you're probably waiting for one, if not both these teams, to start taking off at some point.
Yeah, I mean, the talent is there, and the track records of a lot of players on those rosters is there. The Mets, maybe not so much, but when you look at what the Mets were able to accomplish a year ago, it says a lot. And, you know, when you have that kind of starting pitching, you can sustain because you tend to not go through many losing streaks. And in the Nationals case, I think that everybody kind of focuses in on Bryce Harper, but you look at that rotation, that is a quality rotation 1 through 5. I'm not even talking about the top end with Scherzer and Strasburg. Let's go even below that, where you've got Ross and you've got Tanner Roark and Gio Gonzalez. When that's your 3, 4, 5, you are going to be able to win a lot of games. And Dusty Baker's obviously brought a big difference in culture to that clubhouse. And in talking to a lot of the Nationals players over the course of the last week and a half, I can tell you that they are just their jaws have dropped over the difference that Dusty Baker has made with them, and the relaxed, casual manner in which he manages and allows them to just breathe and play. There's no uptight players. They're all relaxed, and they're all pulling in the same direction. And that's a big reason why the Nationals are off to a good start.
We're talking with Pedro Gomez, baseball tonight with Carl Ravage, Alex Cora, and Pedro Gomez after Nationals and Mets tonight. And Pedro, the theme that you just brought up, I want to single back to. You brought up Pete Mackinnon, you brought up Dusty Baker, the importance of the manager in baseball, what it means to a team, and the personality that team takes on because of the manager.
You know what? I've talked to so many people that there's two schools of thought. The analytical crowd doesn't necessarily think that a manager makes that much of a difference. But you talk to players who actually put on the uniform, and they have told me over and over that they're big believers that a club plays in the image of its manager. And if you have a manager who's uptight, the club tends to play uptight. If you've got a manager who is soft, the club plays soft. You've got to strike the right balance. And when you really look at a lot of the teams that win, they play in the image of their manager. And even the losing clubs play in the image of their manager a lot of times. So, Baker has brought a completely different culture to that clubhouse. I think Pete in Philadelphia has brought a completely different culture to that clubhouse, and they're playing in the image of their managers, and you tend to see that a lot in Major League Baseball.
Yeah, and you mentioned the aggressive style of play, Pedro, that the Phillies have had because of Pete, but I also think he relates to the players, and that's something that Sandberg just couldn't do, it seems like. Today's players are different, and the manager, the way that he's able to communicate and relate to the players of today, that's going to help you become a more successful guy, something that Sandberg just couldn't do, and something in Washington last year where the manager, Williams, just seemed like he could not connect with those players down there. It was toxic.
It's all about, and I've talked to Dusty about this as well over the years, it's about having 25 relationships with 25 players. That's really the modern day manager now. It's no longer about, here's, the lineup card is posted, I'm going to be over in this end of the dugout, and I'm just going to decide when to take a pitcher out, when to bring one in, and not really talk to the players. The players, it is a different generation, and they want some communication. That's not to say they have to be spoken to every day, but they just want some communication. And when you talk to them, they appreciate it so much. And they, like I said, it's about Dusty's philosophy is, I have to have 25 relationships with my 25 players because not one of them is the same person, and I have to be able to relate to all of them. And he makes a point, wherever he's been, of getting to know his players. And really, when you look at his track record, he got to San Francisco, he won right away. He got to Chicago, he won right away. He got to Cincinnati, he won right away. And it's his first year in Washington, and they're winning right away. So there's obviously something to that formula that works for him and works for other managers who tend to be from that type of school.
It's the Nationals and Mets tonight, ESPN television, and then following that, it's baseball tonight with Pedro Gomez, our guest here, Carl Ravage, Alex Cora, and then Pedro will be back on the midnight edition of baseball tonight, and you can also check that out on the Watch ESPN app. And we know the Phillies won earlier today. They'll have the day off tomorrow. But another thing that is interesting around baseball and what's helping this team is the bullpen and the hectic nature of being a relief pitcher, and they didn't have a closer on the roster when this season started. They had two different guys try to close out games in the first week of the year, and both blew games. And then Genmar Gomez, a guy that I don't know that anybody in the Phillies fan base even knew who the hell he was, is closing games out almost every single day. That's another, I guess, concern and a positive is when do these bullpen arms get out, because they're going to them every single day with these one-run games. But I also guess, Pedro, it shows to how unpredictable bullpens can be, but how important they are to your success.
Oh, without question. And you're right. When you tend to use a bullpen so much early, the check comes due, say July or August, where the arms are just fried, and now you've got to hope that you have depth in your organization to replenish some of those arms who may need a break at that point. And, that's going to be a big key. The Phillies have a very young organization. That may be a possible, problem for them come July and August if they are having to maintain this kind of a frenetic pace of using relievers this often and in so many close games. Because it's one thing, when a game is 8-1, you can really relax and you can rest your key bullpen guys. But like today, a 4-2 game, it was 3-2 until that solo shot late by Goodell. It's just there are instances where you've got to use the high leverage guys over and over, and when you do it too much is when you tend to pay at the back end, which usually is July or August when like I said, the check comes due and they just can't answer the bell like they could earlier in the year. But if you can get to a situation where maybe you can relax and have a triple lead, but I don't know that the Phillies offense is going to allow that often.
No, and their record in these one-run games, I mean, they got the home run today. Otherwise, it's another one-run game. What are they, 14-3 in one-run games? Last year, they won 16 games. The numbers from this year to last year are already staggering, and they've almost surpassed. They had 6 shutouts all of last year. They are 7 all of last year. They already have 6. The one-run games, they had 16 one-run game wins last year. They're already at 14, Pedro. Last year, they won 26 road games. They've already won 12. I mean, it's so hard to really quantify why or how this thing has happened. But I think in baseball, a lot of it is getting off to that hot start and the confidence that you get from that. And we're seeing a lot of examples of that, but none more than maybe right here.
Well, and the thing that you talk to people in front offices, and they always say, look, you cannot win a divisional title in April. And that is so true. The first 4, 5, 6 weeks of the season, you cannot win one. However, and I think people in Philadelphia recognize this over the course of the last few seasons, by 6 weeks into the season, you can certainly lose a division title.
Sure.
And if you're in Minneapolis right now, if you're maybe in San Diego right now, if you're in Atlanta right now, you know that you have already lost your opportunity to contend and to try to win a division title. So while you cannot win a division title in the first 6 weeks of the season, you can certainly lose one. And the Phillies at this point, like I said, if you're a Philly fan, and I know how fanatic that fan base is, I've done enough games in Philly, and it's got to be surprising and at the same token, just really something that a lot of fans are probably embracing. Like, hey, we really like this ball club because they play their rears off.
Well, it was one of those things, it's funny, the Sixers got that first pick last night, and the fans have embraced this 3-year process because the Sixers were up front. They told us we were not going to be good, and I think the Phillies fans, Pedro, were looking from that same honesty from the Phillies, where the Phillies kept telling you, we think we can win, and the fans didn't buy into it. There was apathy here for a couple of years, right? I mean, you were here covering them when they were in the World Series, and they were the class of the division. And it got apathetic real fast because the fans they weren't gonna be lied to. They knew this team wasn't any good, and the front office wasn't ready to let go of that 2008 team.
No, and what happened is the drop off. I mean, that from that 5-year run, they literally fell off the table, and it was all of a sudden it was a roster that just did not fit well together, and you kind of knew before the first pitch was thrown in the season that it was going to take a miracle for the Phillies to contend at that point, because the roster just it was not a good roster. It was not a good roster fit. They weren't athletic. They didn't have components that you needed. And now you look, and yeah, while the names may not be recognizable nationally, they're playing, and they are giving everything they have on a nightly basis. And again, I think a lot of that credit should go to Pete, because Pete sold them on this idea. And it would be one thing if they were, say 8 games under 500. They'd be like, why should we believe this? Nothing's happening. But they're being rewarded for following that advice. And I remember talking to Pete during the winter meetings, and he could not be more excited about the start of spring training. And this was, early December. And a lot of it had to do with his first full spring as the manager. A lot of it had to do with the confidence that the front office showed in him, because remember, he was just the interim guy. He was just going to finish the year. And they said, no. Let's see what he's got for a full season. And so he was excited about the opportunity to get this, because I think in his mind, it was probably going to be tough for him to be a major league manager. But, the stars aligned for him. Things weren't working out with Ryan. And so he got the job for a few months. And I think he immediately had these guys playing, because let's not forget also I think it was the last, you guys would know better than I did, but I think there was about 8 games to go in the season, and the Phillies almost had to run the table to avoid losing 100 games. And they did. They did not lose 100 games when it was almost inevitable. I think they had to win 7 of their last 8 in order to not lose 100, but that's exactly what they did. They won 7 of 8.
Yep.
So, credit to Pete for brandishing that fire under them.
It has been fun, to say the least, in May to be talking baseball. We didn't think we would be very interested in this baseball season, but they have gotten some attention wrapped around the Sixers getting the first pick, the Sam Bradford drama, and the Phillies are right there in the conversation. Pedro Gomez having the conversation with me. You can check him out on ESPN's Baseball Tonight with Carl Ravitch and Alex Cora tonight at 10, and then the midnight edition with Adnan Virk and Alex Cora right after Nationals-Mets on Watch ESPN. Thanks, Pedro.
Hey, my absolute pleasure, guys. Take care.